In a speech he gave during the last presidential campaign, 2016, former President Bill Clinton used the phrase, "We who have more yesterdays than tomorrows." And those are the only words I remember from that whole speech. Probably because I'm among the we to whom he was referring. And realizing that I was at this point in my life, and have been for some time actually, was what prompted me to write this book. What did I do with it? It is. What prompted me to write the book? I decided it was time to do some summing up. Not an unusual phenomenon for persons in my age bracket. And when I say summing up, I don't think anyway, that means the whole journey is done. Still got a few trips around the block, but I figured this was a good time to start pulling some things together. I know during my time here, I shared some of my spiritual journey with you. That summation I spoke of goes from the sin and salvation revival meetings in the evangelical Baptist church of my youth all the way to the UU ministry, with any number of stops and starts and twists and turns along the way. And I draw on some of the sermons I've written and delivered over the years as a way of recounting my travels of the Spirit. And I probably gave some of them here, so if you hear some recurring themes, just hang in there with me. Because my wish, though, was to offer more than just a personal journey. What I was hoping to share were some guideposts that I've come to that hopefully are meaningful, helpful to others when it comes to finding meaning and purpose and spiritual depth in living, especially when some of the more traditional religious answers to such mysteries of existence don't work. And as I said during the coffee hour downstairs, thank you for giving me a table to put some of the books out if you'd like to pick one up. Well, the title, start with that, is a straight steal from a longtime friend and colleague of mine in the UU ministry, the late Reverend First Church. First passed away about 10 years ago, 2009, at the far too early age of 61 from esophageal cancer. Among the many books on liberal religion that he published in his lifetime was a line that read, "God is not God's name, it is a name for that which is greater than all and present in all." Well, I've long found Forrest's words very helpful, for I feel they take the whole belief in God conversation to a much more productive, much more meaningful place than one of going in circles over whether or not one believes in an entity called God. I think they can help get us out of a semantic box as to what the term God may or may not mean, and instead call us into a spiritual journey of exploration for that which is greater than all and present in all. I think we all have some sense of that, whether we put voice to it or language to it or not. And if one calls the object of that quest, looking for that which is greater than all and present in all, if one chooses to call the object of that quest God, that's all well and good. If not, that's equally fine. I think the journey, the quest, the exploration is far more important than the terminology that goes with it. And so that's what the book was finally about, was how do we stay on a meaningful journey of discovery for that which is greater than all and present in all. And how does that journey help us to better understand who we are and why we're here on earth for the time that we're given to live our lives. So the different chapters in here get at different angles on that. The one I'm focusing on here today is one I call Belief versus the Religious Impulse. And in it, I know that the thing that has kept me in the ministry through all the meanderings that I referred to a couple minutes ago, the thing that's kept me in the ministry has been a matter of, quite literally, going beyond belief. For I found that while I could discard certain beliefs that no longer sustained me, or even made a lot of sense, I couldn't quite shake off religion or the religious impulse. And in addition to using his words in the title, I also referred Reverend Church's well-known lines, which I know I've spoken from this pulpit before. He gives his definition of religion, called it our human response to the dual reality of being alive and knowing that we will die. That is to say, religion is our attempt to make some ultimate sense out of the lives we are living, even as we know we'll never completely figure it out. It's still worth the journey, however elusive the final destination may be. And so whether or not one considers him herself religious in the traditional sense of the word, or the definitions we usually attach to that, I would say we all have some drive to seek out some higher meaning in our lives, just beyond the day-to-day things we do as we live our lives. And I call this drive the religious impulse. And one of the more poignant expressions I found of it was in the reading I shared just a few minutes ago by the late Reverend Ralph Helverson. He titled it Impassioned Clay. And here's just a few of the lines to recall. Deep in ourselves resides the religious impulse. Out of the passions of our clay, it rises. We have religion when we have done all we can, and then in confidence trust ourselves to the life that is larger than ourselves. And I would say that last line captures best for me what the religious impulse is. It's about looking up from our individual states of existence to a life that is, as Helverson puts it, larger than ourselves, and in which we feel some trust and confidence. Put another way, I would say this religious impulse, in the sense that I'm using the word here, is the drive to feel at home in a universe that still remains greatly mysterious to us, which fills us with awe, fills us with wonder, and occasionally fills us with fear. It's time for a caveat. I am well aware of the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad, thank you Judith Viorst, ways in which religion gets used, or make that abused. My knowledge of world history is enough for me to know of the wars that have been fought, the tortures that have been inflicted, the executions that have taken place in the so-called or supposed name of religion. And in a somewhat less brutal but still unconscionable manner, I'm aware of how religion can be manipulated to foster useless guilt, to rationalize all manner of repression and wrongdoing, and provide a means for self-aggrandizement on the part of any number of holy hucksters who are able to convince enough willing followers that they possess the whole truth. And so a debate over whether religion is a force for good or for evil, well, that can be of value when it comes to gaining a better understanding of how these conflicting forces operate. And yet at the same time, it's a debate that's never fully resolved because there is no final resolution. And so the contention by some well-intentioned persons that the world would be a better place without religion, and we can cue up John Lennon here in his song Imagine, and No Religion Too. All due respect and appreciation to Mr. Lennon, in the end that doesn't quite hold up. Because I feel that religion exists because human beings exist. And we have within us this impulse to which Helverson refers. And while that impulse can be put to all kinds of destructive ends, it is ultimately life-enhancing, provided it is responded to in life-enhancing kinds of ways. And yeah, I think there are certain beliefs, I think there are certain life stances, I think there are certain perspectives that can help us meaningfully respond to this religious impulse, and that's what the various chapters in this book are about. But I've also got, as I say, the chapter I'm focusing on today, I use the word belief trap. And that's the notion that a given set of precisely delineated beliefs can fully and adequately address this religious impulse. And it is this notion, there's a one-size-fits-all, you got to believe this way of responding to this religious impulse, that is what lies at the heart of many of the abusive ways in which religion gets used. Well, I could go on with all the negative effects of trying to reduce the religious impulse to an exclusive set of beliefs, but let's go for a little bit of humor instead. while I was cruising the internet for some sermon material some years ago, I came across a comedic category for the best God joke ever. I didn't know there was such a category until I found it, but there it was. And what I couldn't remember in putting this together was whether I had done this little routine here or not. Maybe I did. If not, if you've heard this before, just, hang in there with me. Because the joke is actually a stand-up comedy routine done by a Chicago-based comedian named Emo Phillips. Several versions and variations on it floating around. And when I had to go to him to get permission to put it in the book, he told me the way I had to write it down. So this is the Emo Phillips version, all right? Once I saw a guy on a bridge about to jump. I said, "Don't do it." He said, "I have nothing to live for because nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Me too. Are you a Christian, a Jew, or a Muslim?" He said, "I'm a Christian." I said, "Me too. What denomination?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" It gets better. He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Regional Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Regional Council of 1912? He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Regional Council 1912. At that, I said, "Die, you heretic scum," and I pushed him off. Yeah, I let it read it. And like most good comedy or satire, this bit does have a bite to it. And the bite has to do with the absurd lengths to which matters of religious belief can be taken. And the not-so-humorous part, to which I have alluded, is that over the course of human history, particularly in the West, persons have been persecuted, tortured, and even put to death over lesser points of theology, or over lesser or finer points of theology and belief than is contained in this comedic routine. And the means of execution quite often was far worse than getting tossed off a bridge. And so for all the laughs that I get, as you apparently do too, for Mr. Phillips' comedy bit, when I place it in this kind of broad historical context, it becomes a little bit less funny. And it also points out how an insistence on the rightness of one particular set of beliefs takes us away from the true essence of religion. And what is this true essence of religion? Well, I've already offered how Reverends Church and Helverson have answered the question. I'm going to take another swing at it using an exercise I had to do in a Latin class way back when I was in high school. I don't know if Latin's still taught in high school or not. Maybe it is, but this is something we had to do. We had to take a multi-syllabled English word, break it out into its component parts, find the Latin derivation of each symbol, then you put the word back together to see what kinds of new understandings you may discover. Well, here's what you get when you do that little exercise with the word religion. You get re, R-E, which means again, as in repeat or return. The Lygian part comes from the Latin verb legare, which means to bind together. It's the same term from which we get our word ligament. Word religion, word ligament have the same Latin derivation. A ligament is what holds or binds your bones together so they work the way they're supposed to. My wife had a situation quite a number of years ago where the ligaments that held her wrist bones together just deteriorated for some reason. She had to have a wrist fusion in order to keep the bones in place. A ligament is what holds it together for you. So if we put these two Latin fragments together, when it comes to the word religion, we get to bind together again. Religion, then, in the most basic sense of the word, is the search for which ultimately binds our lives together, gives them some sense of wholeness, and sustains us again and again over the course of our lives. And religion, in this sense, is really a verb. It's an ongoing process in which we engage as we seek greater levels of meaning and wholeness. And this process can involve times of incredible uplift, times of insight and joy when we're taken right out of ourselves. And it can also flow through some of our deepest and our darkest nights of the soul. So indeed, our beliefs do play a role in this process. And the crucial question is what kind of belief and what kind of role. They can be stepping stones, they can be ports of call to a greater and ongoing journey. Or they can short-circuit the journey if one feels that any one single port of call contains the whole truth or represents the final destination. And so for all the beliefs that have come and gone in my life, the ones I've discarded, the ones I've held on to, I find the words of the singer and songwriter Iris DeMint to be very helpful, and they keep me honest. Thanks again for doing it. Love that song. You heard the words, you even sung them together. Everybody's wondering what and where they all came from. Everybody's worrying about where they're going to go when the whole thing's done. But no one knows for certain. It's all the same to me. I think I'll just let the mystery be. I believe in love, and I live my life accordingly. And I think but I choose to let the mystery be. Well, I pick up on this theme in the epilogue to the book. These are the words, somewhat variation, but these are the words on which I close. This is from the last chapter. In my first semester college freshman English class, one of the novels we were assigned was Albert Camus' The Stranger. I found it to be the weirdest book I'd ever read in all of my advanced 18 years of living. It was something about this French guy named Michele, living in Algeria, whose mother dies and he's not all that affected by her passing. And then he more or less stumbles into committing a murder for which he ends up being sentenced to death. At his trial, the prosecutor makes more of a seeming indifference to his mother's dying than to his practically inadvertent killing of someone, but Michele gets the guillotine anyway. Well, by the time I finally got to the last page, I was in such a hurry to just be done with the book that I read right past its key passage. In that passage, Michele is in his jail cell, a few hours away from his execution. He's just had an angry argument with a prison chaplain who tried unsuccessfully to get him to turn to God while he still had time. Michele then notes, it was as if that great rush of anger at the chaplain, as if that great rush of anger had washed me clean, emptied me of hope, and gazing up at the star-spangled sky with its signs and stars, for the first time, I laid my heart open to the benign indifference of the universe. As I said, I had no idea what I'd read when I first read those words. My life just wasn't at that point yet. I could follow the storyline, bizarre as it was, but I couldn't see Camus' point. My 18-year-old mind, as I say, was simply not equipped to understand what he was saying. Several more years had to go by before I was ready for any kind of engagement with this atheistic, existentialist French philosopher, novelist, and playwright. As I moved across the various landscapes of my spirit in all those ensuing decades since I first read them, those words of Michele and Camus continued to hover over me. I, too, gazed at a sky spangled with its signs and stars. And while I'm not in a jail cell awaiting the guillotine, I view those signs and stars with an awareness, sometimes conscious, sometimes not, of my mortality. And what Camus was saying, as I eventually did figure out, is that for all of our searches for meaning, for all the many life-fulfilling and life-sustaining moments we encounter over the course of our lives, we ultimately live in a universe that is as absurd as the situation in which Michele found himself. It is a universe that regards us with what Camus, through the words of his character, calls benign indifference. Well, on first take, the phrase benign indifference sounds like an oxymoron. Most dictionary definitions of benign use words like gracious or kindly or favorable. How can a universe regard us in gracious or kindly or favorable ways and still be termed indifferent? But there's another definition of benign that gets closer to what Camus is saying. Not malignant. We live in a universe, according to Camus, that wishes us no harm, i.e. not malignant, but one that is simply indifferent to our existence. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I don't discount the possibility. Maybe I do live and move and have my being as a creature in a universe that is completely indifferent to my existence. But even if that might be the case, I do not choose to live in a stance of indifference myself towards it. Even if the universe is indifferent to my life and my existence, I don't have to live as a creature of the universe by being indifferent towards it. I find too much joy, pleasure, and fulfillment, along with my times of pain and despair and emptiness. As I live my life out on this one minuscule piece of this vast universe, I can't be indifferent towards it, even if it is indifferent towards me. And I find a counterpoint to Camus from yet another of my UU ministerial colleagues. This one was the late Reverend Dean Starr. Some of you may have known him. Several years prior to his own passing, Dean lost a son, Paul, to AIDS in the early 1990s. This is before some of the treatment for AIDS that we have now had come along. And at a talk he gave at a gathering of his fellow clergy members a few years after his son's death, Dean told a story of how he came to find some peace following the loss of his son. He told of how, about a year after Paul's death, he took a boat cruise off the west coast of Naples, Florida, in the Gulf of Mexico. And here's how he described the experience. The entire horizon, the entire sky, from horizon to horizon, was aglow with colors. Reds, purples, pinks, golds. Then the colors faded, and the indescribable deep, deep indigo of late twilight filled the sky. The boat turned around, and on the eastern shore was a full and glorious moon. With tears streaming down my face, I realized that although my son's being had been scattered, he remained a part of this awesome beauty. We can never contain the beauty in which we live and move and have our being. Whether we live or whether we die, we are contained within this beauty. So Dean is saying that there's an uncontained beauty, a greater web of life, a larger chain of being. Some even choose to call it the presence of God, that holds us in our time-bound lives here on earth, and that also holds the continuing presence of our lives beyond our physical existence. And catching a glimpse of this greater beauty did not remove the reality or the pain of the death of Reverend Starr's son. He had to live with that for the rest of his life. But the experience he described did remind him, as it can remind us, that life with a capital L is greater than any one of us and greater than our individual lives. And so for me, that's what it finally comes down to. Do we live in Camus' indifferent universe? Or are we contained within a beauty, whether we live or whether we die? And wherever my thoughts and explorations take me on this, I end up back where we were about a half an hour ago. Hours dement. I think I'll just let the mystery be. Let's sing together Blue Boat Home. It kind of speaks to this as well. Okay?